It was dawn on April 18th, 1943, at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. The air hung heavy with humidity and the sharp tang of aviation fuel. In the dim glow of flashlights and cigarettes, 18 young American pilots stood quietly beside their P-38 Lightning fighters, faces drawn but determined. Most were barely out of college. Boys, really, yet within hours they would carry out one of the most daring missions of the entire war. Their target, a high-ranking Japanese officer. None of them knew who he was, but his death would alter the balance of the Pacific forever. Major John Mitchell, their commander, stood before them with a map spread across the hood of a jeep. His tone was crisp and measured. "Gentlemen," he said, "we're going after a very important person. That's all you need to know." The men exchanged glances. Whoever this VIP was, he was worth risking 18 aircraft and their young lives. They were about to embark on a 435-mile flight, one that would push their planes and their courage to the limits. Far away, in the early morning light of Bougainville, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy, was preparing for his day. The irony of what was about to happen could not have been greater. Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor, was both feared and respected. Yet few knew that he had opposed the war from the very beginning. Years earlier, as a student at Harvard and a naval attaché in Washington, he had seen America's vast industrial strength firsthand. When talk of war with the United States reached him, his warning had been prophetic. Japan might win for 6 months, maybe a year, but after that, defeat was inevitable. Despite this, when duty called, Yamamoto executed his orders with precision. Now, his destiny was closing in fast. At Rabaul Airfield, his staff was uneasy. His aides urged him to delay his flight, warning of possible American patrols nearby. General Imamura had narrowly escaped an encounter with enemy fighters just weeks earlier. Vice Admiral Ozawa offered Yamamoto a stronger escort, but Yamamoto, ever the stoic leader, refused. Showing fear, he believed, would demoralize his men. So, at 59 years old, he boarded his G-4M Betty bomber carrying his samurai sword and a poem he had written for his mistress. Its final words spoke of frailty in body but strength in spirit. Meanwhile, 435 miles away, the P-38 thundered down the runway at 7:10 a.m. Each carried 2 massive fuel tanks, one standard and one oversized, specially fitted for this mission. The flight was perilous. They had just enough fuel to reach their intercept point and perhaps 20 minutes for combat before needing to turn back. At barely 50 feet above the Pacific, they flew in radio silence, skimming over the waves for hours. Every pilot's hands were tight on the controls. Navigation had to be perfect. One mistake, and they would miss the target entirely or run out of fuel over open sea. For 2 straight days before the mission, American cryptographers had worked tirelessly, decrypting Japanese messages. Against impossible odds, they uncovered Yamamoto's exact flight plan, his route, timing, and even which aircraft he'd be in. The intelligence was so precise it bordered on unbelievable, but it was correct at precisely 9:30 a.m. Mitchell's squadron sighted Bougainville's coastline. They were 3 minutes early, an astounding feat of navigation. Moments later, 2 Betty bombers appeared on the horizon, exactly where the decoded message had predicted. The radio crackled, bogies 11 o'clock high. But there was confusion. There were 2 bombers, not one. Which carried Yamamoto? The formation flew at about 6,500 feet, escorted by 6 Agile Zero fighters. In the lead bomber sat Yamamoto himself, unaware that American codebreakers had sealed his fate. In the second plane was his chief of staff, Admiral Mato Miyugaki, calmly reviewing papers, thinking about the inspection ahead. The P-38s dropped their fuel tanks and began climbing. Immediately, disaster struck. One pilot's tanks jammed, throwing his plane into instability, forcing both him and his wingman to drop out of the attack. That left only 2 fighters, Tom Lanphier and Rex Barber, to face Yamamoto's escort. 2 young men against Japan's most celebrated admiral and his 6 fighter guards. The Zeros turned to intercept, but it was too late. The Lightning's concentrated nose guns, 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20 cannon, unleashed a storm of fire. Barber's P-38 shuddered under enemy hits. When it returned, it would be riddled with 104 bullet holes, but his aim was steady. He fired a burst that tore through the lead bomber's right engine. The Betty caught fire instantly. Flames engulfed the fuselage, and within seconds, the plane began to spiral toward the jungle below. From the second bomber, Ugaki watched in horror as black smoke poured from Yamamoto's aircraft. "My God." He later wrote in his diary, "I could think of nothing else. I pointed to the commander's plane and said, 'Look, the commander-in-chief's plane.' That was my final farewell." His own bomber was hit moments later and plunged into the sea. Miraculously, Ugaki survived, floating among debris as he watched the smoke from Yamamoto's crush rise above the trees. Back at Guadalcanal, the surviving P-38s raced home, dangerously low on fuel. They had no idea of the magnitude of their success. They believed they had simply downed an important Japanese officer. Lanphier and Barber argued immediately over who had fired the fatal rounds, a dispute that would last a lifetime. In the dense Bougainville jungle, Japanese search teams followed the smoke trail to the wreckage. Yamamoto's body was found still strapped to his seat, ejected from the plane upon impact. He clutched his sword in one hand. The autopsy revealed he had been killed instantly by a bullet wound to the jaw. His remains were described as being in a state of great dignity. The recovery team wept openly. The man who had led them through the Pacific, who had once delivered their greatest triumph, was gone. Japan kept Yamamoto's death secret for over a month. When the news was finally announced, the nation went into mourning. Flags were lowered, and citizens wept in the streets. It wasn't just the loss of a leader. It was the loss of faith in their invincibility. The Americans had reached across hundreds of miles into Japanese-held territory and killed their most revered commander. For many, it marked the moment Japan's spirit began to waver. In the years that followed, the argument over who shot down Yamamoto continued. Lanphier took public credit, writing articles and giving speeches about the mission. Barber, who had nearly been killed in the attack, insisted he was the one who delivered the fatal blow. Decades later, an official U.S. Air Force review sided with Barber, concluding that his fire had struck the admiral's plane. Lanphier's status as an ace was posthumously revoked. But in truth, both men carried the same burden. The weight of having ended the life of a man who, despite being an enemy, had always respected America, and dreaded the war he was forced to fight. For Japan, Yamamoto's death was more than a military loss. It was spiritual. His successor, Admiral Mainichi Koga, admitted plainly, "There was only one Yamamoto. No one can replace him." Without his leadership, Japan's naval strategy faltered. The empire began a slow decline from which it would never recover. Ugaki, the only witness to Yamamoto's final moments, never escaped the shadow of that day. He went on to command major fleet operations, but carried deep grief until the war's end. On the day Japan surrendered in August 1945, he climbed into a kamikaze aircraft for one final mission, an act of devotion to his fallen commander. His plane was shot down before reaching its target. In a tragic way, he fulfilled the loyalty that defined Japan's wartime code, to die as his commander had. The death of Yamamoto stands as one of the most striking moments of World War II, a fusion of strategy, intelligence, fate, and human emotion. It showed that war is never just about armies or nations, but about people. Young pilots risking everything on a coded message, a brilliant admiral resigned to a fate he foresaw, a loyal subordinate following him into death. Even today, that morning of April 18th feels alive. The roar of the P-38s, the silent mountains of Bougainville, the flames that marked the fall of Japan's greatest admiral. It was a story of precision, courage, and profound irony. one where every decision, every code broken, every bullet fired, shaped the destiny of nations. In the end, 20 minutes of combat changed the course of the Pacific War. But beyond tactics and victories, this story reminds us of something deeper, that behind every battle are human hearts, torn between duty and conscience. History may remember Yamamoto as the enemy architect of Pearl Harbor, but in truth he was a man bound by honor, carrying a burden he could never escape. The men who killed him were not assassins. They were soldiers doing their duty, unaware that they were altering history forever. And so, in a quiet Tokyo museum today, Yamamoto's recovered samurai sword rests behind glass. It gleams softly under the lights, a silent reminder of that fateful April morning, of 18 American pilots, a single Japanese admiral, and the 20 minutes that changed the Pacific forever.